How's everyone doing? All right, good. I wanted to just say a few things first, and then we can get started. So first, I'm Andy Rathman Noonan. I am the Executive Director of the National Science and Technology Medals Foundation. Our foundation was created to celebrate the recipients of the National Medal of Science and the National Medal of Technology Innovation. 718 men and women have won these medals, which are the highest honors of scientific and technological achievement in the country. These 718 Americans have made life-changing and life-saving discoveries that we rely on every day and probably also take for granted in our daily lives. So with that in mind, I'd like to do a little bit of a warm-up, get people thinking, get people started. So I'd like all of you to raise your hand if the following questions apply to you. How many of you have seen Star Wars? Oh, good. So just about everyone. All right. Well, you can thank George Lucas's visual effects group, Industrial Light and Magic, for bringing those stories to you. They won the National Medal of Technology Innovation in 2004. How many of you have been on a road trip? All right, all of you. Great. I'm 2 for 2. Laureate Dean Sicking is responsible for creating the SAFER technology, S-A-F-E-R technology, which is used for highway barriers, which made roadways exponentially safer and saving the lives of countless motorists. In honor of Veterans Day being observed tomorrow, how many of you have friends or family members who are serving or served in the armed forces? Great. 44 laureates served. And the 1996 NMTI laureate Stephanie Kwolek invented Kevlar, the technology responsible for saving thousands of our men and women in uniform. How many of you currently attend or have graduated from Stanford, or actually any college or university in California for that matter? Great. There are 21 laureates who are alumni of Stanford, and over 100 laureates are products of California academic institutions. That's almost a seventh of the entire laureate class. So behind every scientific and technological advancement, there are individuals who struggled and persevered to answer the world's biggest questions and solve its toughest challenges. But they all had to start somewhere. So we're here tonight to uncover the heroes of scientific excellence and celebrate those who drive our world forward. I hope you take the opportunity that you have in front of you today to learn, engage, absorb, and be inspired by their stories. Because I can assure you that the laureates of the National Medal of Science and the National Medal of Technology and Innovation are a group of truly incredible people. Thank you. I'd like to invite to the podium Dean Widom for a few remarks.
Thanks, Andy. I'm Jennifer Widom. I've been on the faculty here at Stanford for about 24 years, and I'm now the Dean of Engineering, and I've held that role for about 8 months. I get invited to do a fair number of things like this, and I don't always say yes. I said yes to this because I'd heard of Joe DeSimone and never met him, and I'd heard of him in many different ways. So I said, well, it's open on my calendar. I'll show up and meet this great individual. So I'm pleased to be part of this series. At the School of Engineering, we're really interested in the impact of the work that we do, and Joseph DeSimone has certainly had extraordinary impact, both in academia and in industry. I'm going to give you a few facts about him. He's currently on leave from 2 universities as the Chancellor's Eminent Professor of Chemistry at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and the William R. Kennan Jr. Distinguished Professor of Chemical Engineering at North Carolina State University. He has a pretty incredible track record, published more than 350 scientific articles, nearly 200 patents, and 200 patents pending, it says. So quite remarkable. The reason he's here tonight is that in June 2016, he was recognized by President Barack Obama with the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, which has already been explained as a very high achievement in the U.S. Other achievements. He is one of fewer than 20 people who have been elected to all 3 branches of the U.S. National Academies. In 2014, the National Academy of Medicine. In 2012, the National Academy of Sciences, and going back to 2005, he was elected to the National Academy of Engineering. And when I saw that in his bio, I said, actually, I was elected that same year, and I went and I found the group photo, and I'm in the front and he's in the back. But we were both in that photo, so not sure we met at that time. May have. He's also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, inducted in 2005. He's the co-founder of several companies, including MyCell Technologies, Bioabsorbable Vascular Solutions, Liquidia Technologies, and Carbon, which he founded in 2013, and he is presently the CEO. One of my connections, by the way, is one of my PhD students, Roy Goldman, has found his way to working for Joe at Carbon. So I've heard about the company some time ago. In addition to being a scholar and entrepreneur, he's been an incredible mentor. And this is, as an academic, the numbers I'm going to tell you right now are really quite something. He's trained 73 postdocs and graduated 80 PhD students. But what I find most incredible and inspirational is his commitment to diversity in his research group. Half of his PhD students are women and people from underrepresented groups in the sciences. That is truly remarkable. Again, as an academic, you just don't see people that committed, and it's impressive. In 2005, he joined a former mentee to launch a chapter of the National Organization for the Professional Advancement of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers on the University of North Carolina's campus. And he has been quoted as saying, "Diversity is a fundamental tenet of innovation." And that is something that we also believe at Stanford, and we're proud that he's here with that incredible dedication. So that's Joe. I'm also pleased to introduce Joshua L. Green. Josh is Vice President of Corporate Development and Chief Legal Officer at Carbon, where he's been since January of 2015. He's a product of UCLA, political science, and then the UCLA Law School, after which he made his way to Silicon Valley. Here, he has helped build two law firms to more than 150 lawyers each. Beginning in 2006, he was a partner at Moore Davidow Ventures, a local venture capital firm. He was also chairman of the National Venture Capital Association. Here comes some numbers. During his more than 35 years here, he served on many boards, worked with more than 300 venture-backed companies, closed over 1,000 venture capital transactions and dozens of mergers, including some of the largest in the history of Silicon Valley, and completed more than 100 IPOs. He was named one of the top 40 lawyers under the age of 40 in the United States by American Lawyer magazine and has been recognized as a member of the Forbes Midas list. So, with those introductions, I think we can all look forward to a great discussion. So welcome, Josh and Joe.
All right. Hey, man.
Yeah, the moment I've been waiting for. It's a real honor and privilege to be here tonight with all of you, and especially to really pay homage to Joe, who has accomplished so much in his life, and the latest of which is this national medal that he got. And in homage of that, I wore my University of North Carolina color to pay honor to Joe.
I thought it was UCLA blue, actually, Josh. So
it's a little bit of both. So Joe, why don't we just kick it off by you telling us about your background, where you grew up, how you grew up.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming out. It's really, really nice to have Stanford and hosting this, and thank you for your kind introductions, and thank you for generating Roy. Having worked with Roy all this time, he's really just a terrific person and very capable. So it's a nice connection for us. Thank you. I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Eagles fan. Great team this year, and but went to local high school, public high school, and went to a local college. My family, my father was born in Italy and came over when he was 9. He's a tailor. And nobody in the family went to college before. And, but it was quite clear we were all going to go to college. And went to a local residential liberal arts college, Ursinus College, which was in our neighborhood. We lived, it was a mile away from my house. And we couldn't afford for me to live there. So I actually was a commuter and worked 2 jobs and met my high school sweetheart. And right after graduating from her sinus, we got married right after that. And then we went then to Blacksburg, Virginia, and went to Virginia Tech for grad school. And UNC hired me when I was 25 as an assistant professor.
So obviously you got the science bug at some point. How'd that happen?
So, you know, I love science. I had great teachers. I mean, I think like a lot of people, when you have great teachers, that's inspirational. I remember a great science teacher in middle school and, you know, the leaf collection and all that. And I fell in love with programming. You know, we would dial into the Dartmouth local regional computer, and, you know, we did programming back then, and paper tape. Really dating myself now, and those were the good old days. But, you know, I had to teach. So the thing was, a lot of it was all about teachers, and I just enjoyed the classes and was good at it.
Yeah, and so you still had a lot of diversity as you went through undergrad. You could have picked a lot of different paths. What took you into chemistry and really decide that is your destiny?
So actually, it was a high school program. And there was a local opportunity to go to another local college called Lebanon Valley College, and spent a week doing a remote program, and it was all hands-on lab experiments. And I just loved doing experiments in the laboratory. And I went to Ursinus thinking I was going to be pre-med, and would go into medical school. But what I found out was that people were motivated for different reasons to go to med school. It was very competitive, and it just didn't, it was more about the grades rather than the topics, and I didn't enjoy that perspective so much. And so I got with another group of students that were more interested in research and science, and at Ursinus, there was a really wonderful professor, Ray Schultz, who taught a polymer chemistry class, which is really unusual for a small liberal arts college to do that. And I fell in love with polymers as an undergrad, and knew I wanted to go to grad school and work on that.
Yeah, and so you mentioned this professor. You know, a lot of people talk about that being a very important influence in their lives. Was there a characteristic he had that you said, you know, that really hooked you?
You know, he was a great experimentalist, and it was physical chemistry. And we would be doing experiments on surface tension and fundamentals of wetting and those kind of properties, and was just really methodic about lab reports. And I loved the methodic aspects of it, and the fact that it was so practical, and you could relate it to things around your what you did at home, and you think about soaps and all those things. And I just love the utilitarian aspects of it. That was a very useful science, and I always appreciated that.
Oh, that's terrific. And so from Philadelphia area, then you go down to Virginia Tech. Yeah. So tell us about that journey.
Well, it was a busy summer. I graduated in May. We got married in June, and went down to Blacksburg, Virginia. Thought we disappeared because we grew up in the Philadelphia area, and I remember my wife asking where the weekender was for the newspaper, and there wasn't one. But you know, Virginia Tech is a powerhouse in polymer science, and this man Jim McGrath, who I went there to join his group. He was amazing. He passed recently, and he was he knew everything about structural property. He could look at a molecule and tell you what it's used for, or think about an application and tell you what the structure of the molecule was. And the group there at Virginia Tech were great teachers, worked closely with industry. So it was a really connected community there. They'd never started companies, but they worked with every company. And so you had all the big companies, DuPont, Dow, Exxon, you know, all those companies and medical companies. And I really liked that utilitarian aspects. And then we would actually host workshops in the summer, these American Chemical Society workshops. And there'd be 50 industrial scientists would come in 3 times a year. And we would teach them polymer science for a week. And we got to know all of them. And so I started making lots of connections to polymer scientists and engineers throughout industry just by doing that for all that time. And so it was a really wonderful experience.
Well, you know, we've known each other for about 15 years or so, and I've always known you to be a guy who thinks ahead. So you're in Virginia, you're at Virginia Tech, you're getting exposed to all these folks in industry. What do you think your career path is going to be at that point?
It was to go back to the Philadelphia area and go into industry. I was going to go to DuPont or Roman Haas or Arco, and that was the game plan. And I remember being in grad school, and Jim, my PhD advisor, mentioned that there was a faculty opening in polymer science at the University of North Carolina. And I thought, boy, I never heard of UNC, basically. I knew the polymer schools. And polymer chemistry was not integrated into the top tier universities. And UNC chemistry department, it's a top 10 chemistry department, didn't do polymer science, like most reputable chemistry departments didn't. It was too applied, but UNC made a conscious effort to go into polymer science. And Jim said, why don't you go down and interview? And I was, so I was 25 and went down to, and this was in the fall of '89, lots of job opportunities. I think I had like 18 industrial interviews, including, a staff member at Bell Labs and other things. I see Shannon Bow here and others that worked at Bell Labs was the place to go. But UNC made me an offer. And I was really 25, just coming out of grad school, and all I had to do was teach organic chemistry and polymer chemistry, and they gave me a $500,000 startup package. I thought that was easy. I could do that. And I get to buy all the polymer equipment, and I get to do carte blanche and research. And thought we could do it, and chose a job that was about a third of the salary that I would have gotten in industry. But Chapel Hill was an amazing place, amazing. I walked into the chemistry department there, and they really cherished what I was going to do, and it was legitimate, and it was just wonderful colleagues that were multiple members of the National Academy of Sciences there, and it was just a really warm environment. Ed Smolsky was one of the main people there, and he was starting the polymer program, and I was going to be the synthetic guy, and so it made it really comfortable and easy to go there.
Yeah, and so now you're at UNC, and what are you finding to be the most rewarding things there and the most challenging things?
It was interesting. I started with a couple of other young faculty in the same year, and when you start, those faculty that you joined a department and you're all in the same era. They had done postdocs and I hadn't, so I felt inadequate a little bit in that regard, and they seemed much more worldly to me. They came from Caltech and Stanford, and I came from Virginia Tech, and but I remember one of my friends said, Joe, you got to be careful. You're doing a lot of collaboration with others, and that's not good for getting tenure. And I thought, man, that's really odd. And I went to my chemistry department chairman, Joe Templeton, and I'll never forget this. I said, Joe, I just got this advice that I've got to be careful about collaborations, and maybe I shouldn't do that because I needed to be my own person. And he said, Joe, if you ever make a decision differently because you're pre-tenure, you've made a mistake. And he really backed me up. And we published a paper in Science and other people on it, and it was clear what we did. And UNC was really very, very supportive. So I remember that that collaboration issue was, and I think the hallmark feature of University of North Carolina is the ability to collaborate. The medical school, the cancer center, the barriers to collaboration were exceedingly low. In fact, it was just the opposite. You were pulled together. And a lot of the young people here, the students here, sort of get this because Stanford's awesome at this. But back then, it wasn't commonplace to do that. And it was really easy to do that at UNC. And people had resumes to be kings and queens and not collaborative. But they weren't. They were collaborative. And it was really, everyone was comfortable with what they knew and what they didn't know.
And did that derive from leadership in the department, or was it a cultural thing? Because you clearly brought a lot of that to Carbon, too.
Yeah, it's a combination. I walked in, this appreciation for diversity was something, it was just who we were at UNC. And it was, and you know, when you get your students build momentum. So my very first PhD student, Valerie Shears Ashby, African-American woman, she got her PhD with me in '94, so 4 years later. She did a NATO postdoctoral fellow in Germany. And then she could have joined any faculty in the country. She had offers from MIT and other places. She went to Iowa State. And I remember having a conversation with Valerie. I said, Valerie, that was my first PhD student. She's turning down MIT. And I said, Valerie, I don't know where Iowa is. What are you doing? And she came back and said that the faculty at Iowa State reminded her of Chapel Hill. A very mature answer to an immature faculty member. And she went there, she got tenure, we recruited her back. Then she joined the faculty at UNC after she got tenure at Iowa State. And then she became chair of chemistry. And then she was my boss. Right, so the faculty had her, you know, be kind to your students. You never know. And then recently Duke just stole her away and she's dean at Duke. But we had a number of African-American students in my group. And I remember it was at a time when there was an embargo against the Confederate flag in South Carolina. And there was a boycott, not an embargo, a boycott. And my group, and we were going to a meeting, and I was going to be the keynote speaker. And it was a regional ACS meeting. And I brought it up to my group that there was this boycott. And we talked about it, and we decided we weren't going to go as a group. And I was a keynote speaker. So we crafted a group letter and sent it to the organizers. And they blew up and went crazy. You know, we're already committed and all this stuff. I said, look, we're just not going to go. And they said, well, just hold on. And they ended up moving the meeting at the last minute, a regional meeting because of this. And then that letter got, you know, we were just doing it behind the scenes very quietly, but the letter got into the hands of the the weekly magazine, the American Chemical Society magazine called Chemical and Engineering News, and they published about it. And then, so we became a destination for people that wanted to commit, you know, to this kind of environment.
It's funny, I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying is that when you know what you are and what you want to be, it really helps.
Yeah, and maintaining, you know, a bar of excellence and knowing that people will have a shot at doing that and being great. And UNC, I love a public research university and their commitment to diversity in that regard. And it was who we are, and it was great.
Yeah, that's terrific. Now, at some point, you start to get interested in startups at UNC. Yeah. I get it in Stanford. I mean, there's a saying here, you know, that you can't be a faculty member for 5 years without starting up a company. But UNC, that's not such a common thing to do. So how'd that happen?
You know, I think it was born out of frustration, in a sense that in the early 90s, we published a paper in Science for doing polymerizations of fluoroolefins in carbon dioxide as an environmentally friendly way of making Teflon and cousins of Teflon. And we licensed the technology to DuPont. And this was an environmentally friendly way of making Teflon, and it avoided this persistent organic pollutant known as PFAS, and people are familiar. This is a really hot issue right now that DuPont and other companies are dealing with, that this compound is persistent in the ecosystem today. And we had a process that eliminated the need for doing that and replaced water and organic solvents with CO2. And DuPont licensed it, and life was exciting, and they were building they built a $60 million plant based on this. But they had plans to build hundreds of millions of dollars more of plants. But there were decisions made in the company not to do this, because they had, you know, they had entrenched interest, and plants were built, and they were running, they were making money, and it never saw the potential it could have had. So, you know, to me, you know, if I would have had that invention with this experience that I have now, you know, we would have competed with DuPont, right? And so it's this idea of being able to focus. There's nothing like singularity of focus and you know, painting a new vision for somebody and having people want to join you in that journey without entrenched interest. We were focused, we were going to do this, and I felt that that gave us the ability to really do things. And so startups became mostly out of frustration. and trying to drive new things.
So there was no startup in a box, and certainly not in those days, and certainly in Chapel Hill. And so you had to pretty much rub two sticks together to make this happen, huh?
That's right. Well, you know, so Research Triangle Park, despite all the things here, had a nascent community and was growing, and it was really good in molecular science. And they actually had an entrepreneurial community that would put on a short course on how to start a company. And it was called a fast track course. And it was 7 Thursdays in a row in the evening for an hour. And I went to that as a faculty member with 2 of my students. And it was, you know, it was just business math and, you know, some simple things. But you got the terminology. And when you don't have the terminology, you often feel really inadequate, or at least I do. And understanding what the terms were, and that was really helpful and gave us the confidence to start our first company there.
Great. So your first companies, MyCell, Liquidia, and all the rest of it, what have you learned from those experiences?
Well, so those companies, I hired the CEOs. I was a founder, board member, consultant. And, you know, it was, without being specific, you know, I think you, as a researcher and being able to make the decisions of where a company goes and why and at the pace it could go or should go, you know, I think you get frustrated when you're sort of on the sidelines. And you've got, you hear all these stories about faculty members meddling, screwing companies up, all those things. So I was conscious of that. And I didn't want to be that. And so I stayed on the sidelines, but I felt all those things that they were, you know, that weren't going the way they could have gone. And so I learned a lot in that regard. And when we were launching Carbon, I was intending to go down the same path and hire a CEO and do all that. And the investors asked me, you know, so look, you know, the way we do things out in Silicon Valley is the technical people lead it, and you taught entrepreneurship, you got a lot of experience, would you consider leading it? And I think my wife said yes first. Because she knew how, you know, what it was like being on the sidelines for me. Yeah. And now there's like no one else to blame.
Yeah. And so you took that step off of academia. I mean, it's a little anti-gravity at first, isn't it?
University life's nice. University life is really, really nice. Yeah. But you know, we had both just turned 50, and we've been in Chapel Hill for 25 years, and so that ratio was clear. And thought, you know, this would be a nice thing. And we always wanted to get to California, and so a lot of things worked out. It was great.
That's great. So let's talk about Carbon a little bit. What motivated you to start Carbon? What was the key insight to make that happen?
Yeah, so I had a former postdoc, Alex Ermashkin, really great guy, very smart, very capable, could do a lot of different things. And he was motivated to, and you know, the hype of 3D printing in the maker community was really, really strong. And he said, you know, let's talk about forming a company and we could move in doing 3D printing. And I said, well, you know, what's the idea? And he said, I think we could build 3D printers cheaper than everybody else. I said, Alex, you know, that sounds more like an activity than an idea. What's the idea? He said, no, that's it. I said, and then I asked him a question that I knew the answer before he gave it to me. I said, did you look up any patents? And he said no. And I knew he was going to say no. And I said, well, go look up these 5 keywords and let's do a little search. And he came back all, you know, sort of dejected. It was like 800 patents in the last 3 years, and he was sort of dismayed. I said, look, I love patents. I'm in a camp. A lot of people think patents stifle innovation. I think patents drive innovation because it articulates what people do and how they protect their ideas. And you have to, you know, when you write a patent, you've got to be full disclosure of what it is. And so when you start looking at all the patents, we put them in different buckets. And what you see is claim by claim, everything was layer by layer. So we just sort of said, let's do it continuously. Just get away from all this literature and try to do it continuously and see if we could figure that out. And then, you know, so that was one decision.
And there may be folks in the audience who don't know what Carbon does.
So we do 3D printing. And,
there you go.
But it starts with that. Yeah. But we figured out a process that allows it to go really fast out of some great materials. Jason Rollins here, one of the pioneers in our materials. We've got real materials. And we're going to, taking a step back, maybe. How many people here, let me ask it this way. How many people here do not know what a mimeograph machine is? That's like all the young people, right?
Wow.
It's really, right?
Oh, man, I'm feeling even older.
So a mimeograph machine was this thing we had in grade school. You may have had it in high school, but I just but you had a master template, and you made copies, and they all, all replicas. And then this thing came out called a digital laser printer, and you think about when you went from a copy machine to a digital laser printer, how much first of all, it changed the quality of your work, be able to iterate, and the quality of what you wrote, because you could iterate. That was one level. But it changed how we also worked, and it changed supply chains, right? No one's got a warehouse of books anymore. They print them for you on demand. In polymeric parts today, we are in the mimeograph stage. We only make, it's three-dimensional replicas, but we just make replicas. And you can't make very complicated replicas. You have to make simple things that open up out of a clamshell, out of a mold. So you can't make complex things. You spend a lot of money making these tools. It takes a long time. It slows everything down. It's archaic, the way people make polymeric parts today. And there has not been a digital analog, a digital analogy to a 2D printer. And we've cracked the code. We can do this. We can make 3D printed parts at scale and at quality. And it's going to change the way people work. It's going to change business models, supply chains. It's going to be, I think it's going to be transformative. And so that's what we do. Yeah. And I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's terrific. So, so what are your key lessons learned so far? You've been at this now for 4 years. You have some lessons learned?
Hire great people is, having a culture is clear. A lot of, Craig Carlson joined us, a lot of people in the room from Carbon, Jason, everybody, Roy, Abhishek, Stephanie, Greg, others that are here. We have a no asshole policy, right? We have sorry. We respect for individuals. It's an important part of our culture. We have a great mission, a great purpose. I think it's important to have those things as first and foremost, a great culture. We've got great investors, extremely supportive investors. We're doing some really hard things. And what I love the most is that we're living at the intersection between hardware engineering, software engineering, and molecular science. And I love the convergence of all those disciplines, and I think that's really important. From a leadership point of view, it was much easier leading on launch when you had 20 people and then 50 people. But now, this is a real business, and we're 240 people, and leading at that scale it's a different approach. And you have to try things differently, and we've got a great board that's helping to mentor me and the team about how to lead and get senior people around the table that have done this more often. And so I think having great people and a great mission is key to that.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Go back to your story with Alex and the rest. I mean, it was an activity, not something that was truly going to be transformative, and the rest. How do you find those insights? What is it that are your criteria for figuring out something that's really important to do?
Well, in fact, Alex and I had a huge disagreement then. I mean, Alex was very interested in desktop printers, and at the time, there's a lot of people thinking about desktop. What nobody was doing was manufacturing. And we had really intense discussions about that. And life is short. We're just I wanted to do something really, really big. What's interesting is the vision and opportunity at Carbon is much bigger than we thought in the beginning. Now that we've cracked the code, the idea to think about impacting supply chains and all that came later, as you know, and And so doing big, impactful things and being able to, get around the table some of the icons of Silicon Valley that we have at Carbon is a go big or go home kind of thing.
Yeah, well, that's terrific. And so you've been in academia, you've now been in a company and the rest. Tell us a little bit of the differences between kind of the most advanced forms of applied research inside an academic institution and what a startup does. You could say that they're only a step apart from each other, but it feels like there's more distance there.
Well, I think there's a lot of more similarities than I would have thought. At a university, you lead. A university at its core is an all-volunteer organization. I'm sure the dean understands that. People just don't do what you want them to do at all. It's at all. You have to.
Is Carbon or university?
Exactly. But I think in a similar vein, it's all about, if you really want the kind of culture we have, it's people have got to be clear about the purpose and understand the decisions that you make. I mean, people, you make a decision, people get in line and all that, but the why is just as important at a company as at a university for getting the kind of people we've got. Now, I'm sure we could have gotten a very different type of group that's not as engaged as our group, but I think being really clear about the mission and the purpose and sometimes it takes a lot of risk to do that, but that's a common element. Yeah. That kind of mission-driven, purpose-driven. It's easier to be more diverse at a university than I have found it to be at Carbon. Really easy to attract students, and as you saw from the numbers. Carbon, it's hard. We work really, really hard. And I don't know if it's a little bit of the local community, the pool of people we pull from. We're just over 30% women, for example, which is much lighter than I would have ever had in my research group. The number of minorities in the company is not where I'm used to seeing things, and we try really hard to pull that, and it's not worked out where I expected it. So that part's different. But look, this is a big polymer experiment at a grand scale, and to that, to have 240 people doing polymer science is about as exciting as things get for me. Yeah. And so that's pretty cool.
So I want to pick up on that diversity theme. So how do we change the narrative in the Valley to encourage over whatever period, but change the narrative about diversity so that folks understand how important that is?
Well, it starts with the VC firms, right? Because what's interesting is that you think about how boards of companies reflect the investors, and those companies that give you the money, they get a board seat. And we were the longest time all white male dominated, and so I think it starts with understanding the diversity is a fundamental tenet of innovation, and at the
I want to stop you there because I want you to explain that, unpack that a little bit. To you that's second nature, and the rest. But you and I have talked about this in the past, and I'd love for you to just explain what you mean by diversity being a central tenet.
Well, I think there's an element of like math, combinatorial math that sort of supports that, where you just got a lot of different inputs. I think for me it gets very personal. I've been part of a lot of different design teams in my career. And I can tell you, I know of students that grew up with not much money. They think about problem solving differently than a student that grew up with a lot of money. And I see it, and I don't want to be too stereotypical, but you see that everyone brings their experiences to the design table, metaphorically. And if you're trying to maximize inputs and perspectives, it was really interesting. Early in my career, I went to I was part of a creation committee at a large chemical company in Europe, and I was in the 1990s, and I was the external guy. Flew in, walked into a room, pretty classic sterile boardroom. Not only was it all white guys around the table, but they all graduated from the same 3 research groups. They all knew exactly the same stuff. And they were a buzz and they were resonating, a lot of activity and energy, but all around one or two topics. And I was coming in from the outside and I thought, boy, I've never felt more like an outsider.
Right.
And I understood right then and there that they were at a structural disadvantage to be the innovation committee. You have to engineer your community in order to maximize that perspectives. And so to me, it's at that level of granularity that I found it to be a secret sauce of the things that we've done over my career.
Yeah. No, you've certainly educated me on that as well, and that the best products come from a diverse set of inputs into that product to make the best possible product.
And it's not easy.
Yeah.
That discourse, it's easy to be declarative and everyone aligned and moving forward. But to champion a lot of different perspectives takes a lot of energy. Yeah. And it's not easy. And it can get frustrating by everybody. Yeah. But to engage in that engagement, move forward and make decisions, the better outcome will emerge.
And of course, there's the recruitment phase for diversity, but there's also the support after recruitment as well. Maybe you can comment on that a little bit.
Well, I think, one of the things I've been challenging different people in our org to think through is, what are some of the plum positions? Make sure, when you're in academia, it was, when I talk to my students and sort of coach my students that were going in academia, you have, first of all, getting papers, being a first author in a paper, going to meetings, being a discussion group leader at a meeting at a Gordon Research Conference, and getting these positions and getting more and more of these plum positions and getting increasingly rich or better opportunities and just building on that. And there should be an analog to that in industry where you can be like a project leader and grab onto that and do great at that and then do the next thing. And so just really think about ways of very methodically progressing through opportunities of increasing importance to drive that and to try to have a community that sort of does that.
Yeah. So I want to kind of sum this up and then turn it over to all of you for questions and the like. But just like de Tocqueville, who was French, was one of the clearest writers about early colonial America.
This is the value of a liberal arts.
Yeah, exactly. This is it. This is the pinnacle right here. You didn't grow up here in Silicon Valley, but you've had that ability to have an objective view. You've been here 4 years, so I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, what do you think? What do you think of Silicon Valley? What do you think of its myths? What do you think of reality? What's your sense?
It's pretty awesome. I think being in Silicon Valley must be what it was like being in Florence during the Renaissance. I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, this is the place to be in so many different ways. And to tap people that have done it multiple times and as well as new people that are doing it for the first time. So that part is spectacular. And to be able to hire the quality of people that we get, you couldn't, at least in molecular sciences, you could do it in different parts of the country, and perhaps you could do it in hardware and software in different parts of the country. But we're doing hardware, software, and chemistry. It's hard to do all that, and we do that. So that's been great. The diversity part is there's a huge opportunity here to do that much better. I think there's opportunities to have even closer ties between companies and Stanford, and for faculty to have more of a fluid exchange. I think UNC, we had better policies and procedures to engage with startups than I think Stanford has, actually. And so I think those are some of the opportunities. There's way too much traffic out here. And it's not easy to live close to where you work.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the counter to that.
Yeah. Great. Well, I want to open up to all of you for questions and the like. So if you just raise your hand, and I think, do we have a microphone or? Yeah. So who has questions for Joe?
Uh-oh, Professor Bao.
Joe, I really cannot agree more with what you said about diversity. I wonder what's your opinion about, well, even though we all want to promote diversity, but how do we change people's perception and stereotype? And I find that's the most difficult part to overcome. How do you change what other people think?
You know, I think it's by doing and being conscious about it. You know, I suffer from an imposter syndrome. I feel like, you know, they're like, I'm waiting for the hook to pull me off the stage, you know, and especially these introductions. But, you know, I think a lot of people feel that, and knowing that that's, whoever you are, that's a common feeling. But I think it's encouraging and driving and constantly being a force for that. And, you know, having great, you know, female leaders coming in and talking in carbon like you did one lunch recently, and exposing people constantly and being conscious about engineering your communities and your activities, and all that is an important part of this. And, you know, there's so much, boy, and you know, your culture is a guarantor against all, you know, all this crap you see in Hollywood now, and, you know, and you saw at Uber, and, you know, I mean, being clear about these things, being clear about your goals, all those things are really, really important. And I don't know how that other stuff happens at other places, but just leading from that perspective and cherishing people and being clear about that, you know, the importance of that breadth of exposures and disciplines. Dean. Got to go to the dean.
So I've heard the analogy before about Florence and the Renaissance, and I couldn't agree more a while ago. But these days, I think we're feeling a bit of a backlash against technology and against Silicon Valley. And I can bring this up because your company is probably immune, but the many things going on around people's concern about AI and jobs, around machine learning, around fake news, about manipulation through some of the social media companies, the fabulous 5 companies that are now the fearful 5, Google, Facebook, and so on. Again, your company is sort of apart from that, but I just wondered, in being around Silicon Valley, if you have any thoughts about the direction all that's going.
Well, you know, AI is really interesting, and I know it's interesting having Roy and Abhishek here, and we've had a couple of discussions, a couple of speakers come in and talk to us, and you know, we've had Larry Page come by a little bit, and you know, I think AI is a really interesting position right now, and it's scary at some level and exciting at another level. You know, what it means for jobs. You know, what's interesting, I don't know what a U.S. company is anymore, but I know what a U.S. job is. And there's an increasing divide happening, and what we're going to do about that is not quite clear. And, you know, Clay Christensen, the economist at Harvard, talks about 3 kinds of innovations. You know, the really big breakthrough innovations that create new jobs by the tens of millions. And you got multiple examples, Search and all these other companies that merged there. You've got other kind of innovations that are incremental innovations to sustain an industry. Think about automotive, no new jobs, but it's sustaining that industry. And then you have these other innovations that have really good ROIs, good returns on the investment, but kill jobs by the tens of millions, efficiencies and things. And there's a lot of these innovations happening. And you know, the base of, you know, jobs that would be you know, things that people did with their hands, and more blue collar kind of jobs, but were good work, we're losing more and more of those. And I understand the frustration nationally about those things. And I could understand the ire that people have towards Silicon Valley in that regard. I'm more of an optimist, and I think I'm looking forward to what the tech companies are going to do against fake news and misinformation. I think there's technology will come to the rescue here. But we get tied up into that too, because we're making things ways, and it's going to change the way people make things. So there's big changes coming for us that we've got to engage in those social discussions as well. Yes. I'm not doing the mic. I don't know if you want to grab.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I enjoyed, oh, thank you. I enjoyed your story about Alex and kind of how this company came about, Carbon. So I was wondering, how do you know when areas are ripe for kind of innovation? You mentioned looking at the gap in patent kind of fields and if that can be a driver, and how it's changed for you since some of your earlier companies were based on your research and now this is more based on a need.
Yeah, I think I've always felt that I had a good sense of what a good idea was, and it's interesting. A lot of people don't, and I don't know why that is. There's something, and I haven't been able to put my finger on it about that. I think it's increasingly important. People sort of get into, I think one of the best ways to do things is do things differently. Strategy is all about being different. And I think doing things in completely new areas and different and better, not just different, right? And I think it's important to be thinking about those places. But look, societally, we have a lot of big problems. And again, I'm back to an optimist. I think, look, it seems like we're one science paper away from a revolution in battery technology, or another science paper away from solar energy and being more really efficient. Imagine if energy were free, how that would just change the planet and how we live. And I don't think we're that far away from those kinds of things. And so I'm a big believer in working on big problems, change the way people make things, power, healthcare. Too many people are doing incremental things. Peter Thiel, who's an icon out here, and I don't always agree with Peter, but he's got his book called 0 to 1 about a 0 to 1 idea is a breakthrough idea and versus a 1 to n idea being an incremental idea. It's interesting, in academia, if you have a 0 to 1 idea, that idea in Peter's vernacular says that's an idea that very few people agree with you on. Now, if you're an academician, you've got to write a grant, and very few people agree with you on, that's not going to get funded. It's ironic that some of the biggest, most bold ideas are harder to get funded by the federal agencies. And that's what I think philanthropy is great for and venture capital is great for, because they'll bet on those ideas.
Back.
Hi, Joseph. My name is Nishad. I have 2 questions. One is, how do you think AI can merge with 3D printing? Because AI is going at a very rapid pace. And 3D printing is, like, there's a company called Widom Manufacturing that on the East Coast, and they have a mechanical robot managing like 15 to 20 maker bots at one time.
Yeah.
So how do you think AI, like being at the forefront of 3D printing, how do you think AI can be merged usefully with 3D printing without killing jobs?
Yeah. So it's my colleagues here who are much better at answering this question than me, but my perspective. When you make things by molding, they have to be really simple. And they're often, think about a part that might be 6 parts assembled into one part, because each part is broken down and molded. We can now make that as one part. Complexity is free in some ways, right? You can make something you cannot make by molding. And if you look at the assembled part and the new part that's one part, right now a human is doing that transformation. I think there's a great opportunity for that to be automated and do some more machine learning and make that more, that's a software problem. And I think machine learning will be helpful in those kind of areas. And I think how we design and engineer parts is going to be changed by AI. Yeah, I think AI is being used to manage systems like like these other multiple machines, but I think there's going to be really useful, powerful ways of software-driven, maybe a combination of AI, but maybe just great chemistry and physics and mechanics to change the way people design and engineer parts. Software is eating the world, and it's going to continue to.
Just have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So with computer industry, VisiCalc was the killer app. That it's a spreadsheet software, so that's what made everybody start using computers. And what do you think with 3D printing, the killer app or killer technology or killer usefulness is that would kind of go beyond the early adopter phase for this technology, and every person would start using that, like average person?
Well, let me reframe a little bit of that. I am not a big believer that people are really going to want a printer in their home, and it's democratize it at that level. Especially with the chemistries that get you real parts. I think they're going to be done in factory-like settings. The killer apps are going to be large volume applications, and we've got this terrific partnership with Adidas as one example. Adidas makes 350 million pairs of shoes a year, and we're going to make 50 of those, 50 million. And because we can. And they're going to be bespoke and mass customized eventually, but it's also going to be standard sizes and amazing designs. And but we've got a lot of traction going in automotive. I think the day of doing things with molding that's going to change here. And there's no reason why lots of different parts on a car are made this way. Lots of different parts in medical are made this way. It's going to go as, you think you need a personalized running shoe. Well, boy, if you're going to get a stent put in, and you don't want a standard size stent, the day of you needing a stent and being on a cath table, and the interventional cardiologist looks at your blockage, and it won't be long before she's at the computer screen identifying, with software assisted design of your own stent, and she hits a button and your stent's printed right on a balloon catheter while you're on a cath table. I mean, I think those days are coming. I wouldn't want to put that through the FDA right now, but I think that kind of personalized medicine, we see it in dentistry now, but it's really just the beginning. Yeah. Questions here?
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Paige. I'm a sophomore here in chemical engineering. I was just wondering...
It's here for chemies. All right.
I was just wondering, do you have a motto for your life or like a core belief that you like to form your worldview around?
Well, I think you heard some of it here. This idea of diversity being a fundamental tenet of innovation, the fact that I think we learn the most from those that we have the least in common with, recognizing that, putting yourself in uncomfortable positions. Strategy is all about being different. I mean, some of those are sort of interrelated, but to me, those are some of the core things. If I were, I'd work on big things. Thinking about what you're doing coming out of chemical engineering, I can't imagine a more useful, grounded area to be in to have an impact on people's lives, and just make sure you're engineering your community to embrace the diversity of disciplines and perspectives. So a couple of things there. Yes. Or right here, got it. Yep.
Yeah. Hi, so I'm Jeremy, another chemie,
hey.
Future faculty, hopefully, knock on wood. But my question is really, as an aspiring faculty member, you start thinking about ways that you can approach diversity and really approach encountering and overcoming resistance towards implementing methods to be able to increase diversity, not only within your own group, but then also within the department that you join and even beyond that. And so I was really curious in terms of how you kind of define diversity, and then also how do you approach and encounter, resistance within that definition of diversity and being able to improve that.
Yeah, so one of my former students, she just joined the faculty at chemical engineering at University of Delaware, Kathy Froman, and there was another there was one or two other female faculty members there, and I can't imagine how hard it is to be the first in these departments, and or African Americans and other ethnic groups, and I think it just starts. And my sense is, especially at universities, most universities, and maybe this is too optimistic, but the people they get it, and they're being very supportive, and so I think it's making sure that you're going into a place that appreciates the struggles that people are going to be having when they make some of those first appointments, and And then, I think from a student, making sure that you commit to that on students. And, it's interesting, even at Carbon, a number of female leaders in the group, and, making sure that they're also hiring, women in their groups and their departments, and so that it builds momentum. You can't do it as an individual, but every individual can have a big role. I think universities are increasingly extremely supportive. The funding agencies, you've seen the data. You go into NIH, and there's like no Asian Americans at the leadership of NIH, and there's so much of the community are Asian Americans. So I mean, things have got to get, you've got to be conscious of these observations, and make a difference everywhere you can. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering more about, today you published all of your biocompatibility information for all of your materials?
We did.
Yes, and I know before you had said you want to crawl before you walk in the terms of medical devices and healthcare industry, but I'm wondering if you guys are going to be getting more into that now that, with this announcement?
Well, thank you for paying attention. I was thrilled about that press release. We introduced a new silicone and its biocompatibility, and biocompatibility of 6 or 7 other resins. Yeah, we're massively going down this space. We're hitting dental first. The regulatory barriers in dental are the lowest. But I started a biodegradable stent company, and we have broad aspirations. So we're gonna hit medical. I think some of the biggest value for Carbon and its biggest impact in society, where you think about bespoke or customization, is going to be in life sciences. And frankly, the people that join Carbon want to have a big impact. And so whether you're a software engineer or a chemical engineer, a mechanical engineer, people want to improve the health and well-being of society. Our team wants to work on these things. So yeah, we're ramping up our team more and more in medical sciences, life sciences. Glad when somebody reads a press release. That was good.
All right, thank you, Joe and Josh. I'm also Josh. I'm a prospective Mechie and PD major, and I really appreciated your emphasis on culture and on focusing on the why in your company. You're the product, everyone's a product of the 6 people to spend the most time with. And I was curious professionally, what are those types of people for you, and how do you find them?
So say that you said 6 people?
Or who, the group of people that they spend the most time with.
Well, I think it starts with family for me, for sure. And, wife and kids and grandkids, so that's important for me. That's really important for me, especially because I'm working really hard now. I wasn't working as hard as a faculty member. And I feel like I'm working really, really hard now. So that family is further important, increasingly important for me. But the people we've hired at Carbon are people that I just like being with, and I think it's an important part. And having former students come into the company has been great, and former friends that I met a long time ago, and new people that I meet, and we spend a lot of time making sure we hire the right people. The company's getting bigger and bigger, and I'm terrible with names, and I wish I could know everybody better than I do, and you start feeling guilty because it is, it's 240 people now, and it's increasingly hard to have relationships, a lot of demands on time, and that part I miss. But we have we've got a good team, and I wish I had more time to have stronger relationships, actually. Yeah.
If I could rephrase that a little, you probably look for mentors, people who can mentor you as you go through your journeys, and what sort of people do you look, what do you look for in mentors?
Yeah, I think people that are not yes people, actually. People that will tell me and there's a lot of people in the room that know they already tell me stuff. People that are frank with me. And it's getting increasingly hard, actually. But I have different people. I spend time with people at different levels in the organization to ask questions, what I can do better, or what would one thing you change, and I ask those questions to set it up to make it easier and more comfortable on people. Because if I don't hear stuff, I love the feedback. I don't always love the feedback, but it's important for me to get the feedback. It's like publishing a paper, right? And people critique your paper, and peer review makes your papers better. And this kind of peer review that you engage is what I look for. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Yes. Go ahead.
Hi, Joe. So 2 questions came to mind. The first one had to do with as you're introducing new ways of thinking about the design of products and the materials that can be used for those products, you can face resistance to change. People can say, hey, that sounds great, but I think 3D printing and I think prototyping. Or that sounds great, but I've got this whole injection molding art down. And to switch to what you were proposing would take too much time, take too much money, take too much retooling, all these kinds of things. So I wonder
if you sound like my entire day all the time. So. I thought this was supposed to be uplifting.
But you've been successful with many companies, such as Adidas, for example. So I guess my question here is really sort of how do you navigate the ups and downs of understanding that you've got this vision for something, but there's so much headwind or resistance to that?
Change, you're spot on. I mean, you're totally spot on. Change is not easy, and there's built up resistance in the system everywhere. So we're trying to be methodic about it now, where we have C-suite buy-in and in the trenches buy-in. And then what you find is it actually gets broken down in the middle, where the supply chain gets in the way or quality control gets in the way. And so we're trying to solve all these things, and it's not easy. Change is not easy. And the infrastructure is not easy to flip. And so what's really great, what I think has been great about Carbon, is that something like 80% of our current machine placements are with people that are committed to or are identifying production applications. And we've misfired with a couple of people that we thought were going to be better, and some that didn't turn out as good as we thought they were going to be. The visibility of Adidas, the announcement in March, and now we're making, we're going to have, between the holidays and into the Asian New Year, we'll have about 10,000 pair made. And we'll do 400,000 pair next year. And that kind of example shows people that there's legitimate opportunity for doing manufacturing here. And so it's all case studies. And then we had a great article in the Wall Street Journal and The Economist, and so people are getting it. But this is not an easy sell right now, because people are committed to the way they're doing it, and there's entrenched interest. But we're making good progress, and this will flip soon, because we're cheaper versus injection molding, and so many examples in automotive and beauty care products and other things that we've got so many examples. This is going to flip, and we see it. And the question is, do we focus on those people, and those that don't get it, just put them aside and find the right group? Yeah.
And my second question is now associated more with some of the experience you described as you were moving through the ranks and moving into academia, and sort of the negotiations of, am I too applied? Will I be penalized for being so close, for collaborating, for being more in industry versus staying kind of with my peers group here in academia? And I wondered if you might just if you had any words for people who are sort of trying to negotiate that, and as folks who want to move into academic positions, but still want to have that connection into a broader industry.
Yeah, I think you've got to be comfortable with what you're doing and let the cards fall the way they may. And that's the thing. And it'll become self-evident, and just have the confidence that you're doing what you enjoy and what you want to see happen. And people will make their own judgments, and you're not going to convince everybody. And I think it's important when you start your academic careers, be at a place that gives you the breadth of a major research university. I mean, Stanford's got all engineering and medicine and science and the liberal arts and the performing arts. And I think it's important to be, I tell a lot of my students, it's hard to be an engineer at a place that doesn't have a med school, because you're cutting off half the funding opportunities. And I think it's thinking very carefully about your organization you're going to go into. You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
This will be our last question.
I wanted to come back to the topic of your commitment to diversity. So reading about it, I was impressed, but hearing about it, I'm incredibly inspired, actually, at your obvious deep, deep commitment to diversity. And I have to say it's pretty rare. I wish it weren't rare, especially among white male faculty, frankly. And so my question is, how did that happen? I mean, how did you gain this incredible commitment? And I guess, secondly, what would you say to a dean about how to instill that kind of commitment in other people?
Well, actually, just a caveat, I'm feeling like we're not doing a good enough job now, actually. So it was easier, I thought, in my earlier career. Now I'm feeling really disappointed, and we got a lot of work to do at Carbon, and we're trying really hard, and it's not easy. But I think it's having that commitment that's first and foremost. As you know, in the national academies, there's efforts to broaden this out, and I think the problem at NSF, and I've been on a number of NSF panels, the problem is that for the longest time, I think people were focused on a message that was the right thing to do. And I think that falls shallow. It is the right thing to do, but that's not compelling. You've got to have the conviction and understanding of the value it brings. The diversity is a fundamental tenet of innovation, and think about those examples and focus on that, and less so. I think NSF, wasted a couple decades where it was more focused. They were lacking a compelling rationale. And you look at convergence as disciplinary convergence, experiential convergence. Thinking about kids that grew up with not much money versus kids that grew up with a lot of money, and all of that richness driving the innovation. Innovation. The diversity driving innovation, to me, is the call to arms. It's that clarion call of why that I think we've got to be better at articulating, and then demanding it. And there's like Stanford, you can get anybody in the world to come to Stanford to do anything you want. I mean, it's such a magnet, and driving that here is like the best place on the planet to do that. And just committing to doing that. And I've seen the faculty decisions. I've been on those faculty committees at a department level, and I often see the commitment go away right at the last moment when the new faculty are chosen. And I think as leadership in universities, you could be really, really clear about, no, it's not going to happen. In fact, at a board level, I had a board slot, and I've got a couple board slots coming up, and all they saw were female candidates. That's it. But they were the qualified people, and it's what we needed, and it's just being clear about it. I think it takes leadership.
Okay.